the fact that we're doing all of this in the name of one of South Africa's greatest sons, Harold Wolpe, who was at once an activist, a lawyer, and of course later were one of the best sociologists of his generation. Now, Harold Wolpe was known for his rigor in analyzing and summing up situations. He was a member of the Congress of Democrats, a member of the South African Communist Party, member of Umkhonto weSizwe, and a member of the ANC. And so as we dialogue today in his memory, we do so mindful of the fact that this year also marks the centenary of the African National Congress. And in some of our discussions in the ANC, we are grappling with the state of the organization. We're grappling with the need to determine what the next step would be if this great country of ours would become, in practical terms, a truly united, democratic, non-racial, non-sexist, prosperous nation. Now, in this strategic goal of creating a united, democratic, non-sexist, non-racial, prosperous South Africa lies key tasks, not only for the ANC, but for all South Africans. Because in whatever we do, we should always have these tasks in mind. And it is proving to be very difficult to do that, even in the ANC as a governing party. And the difficulty was articulated by the Bishop of the Methodist Church in Mangaung on the 8th of January. He gave a profound sermon about dry bones. He says, if you were 100 years, we're celebrating 100 years, we should guard against celebrating dry, lifeless bones. And that if our organization is overloaded with dead ideas because of age, if it is 100 years and so on, he says that is not what we should celebrate. And he said in the sermon that we should take a leaf from those who lived before the invention of a mirror. He says, before the mirror was invented, even the most handsome and most beautiful people could not see themselves. They had to see beauty in others and celebrate beauty of others. And he says today, because of the mirror, we are severely disadvantaged. We look at ourselves in the mirror, we talk to ourselves, and that's what determines our limitations. And so when we celebrate the ANC's centenary, we cannot afford to be sentimental about it. If the ANC represents dry, lifeless bones, it then means it is incapable of leading South Africa towards the creation of a united, democratic, non-racial, non-sexist, prosperous nation. So the ANC has got to, on a continuous basis, renew itself and accept that it has got no monopoly of wisdom, and that society's challenges can best be overcome if the ANC mobilizes the best available talent in the country. In 1994, after the unbanning of the ANC, the PAC, and the South African Communist Party, the ANC published a small booklet, and it was entitled, "How to Join the ANC." That was the title of the booklet. In the introduction of that booklet, it had a section which explained that now the ANC is legal once again, and as a legal organization is free to publicize its policies so that South Africans of all persuasions can, on the basis of its policies, freely decide whether to join it or to support it or to oppose it. I was reminded of the importance of this section when the realization dawned upon me that we are slowly but surely drifting into the direction where we would begin to regard opposition as enmity. And yet this pamphlet of the ANC says South Africans have the right to join, support, or oppose the African National Congress. I'm saying this because in our renewal debates, as we debate how best to renew the ANC, and this is a debate we've conducted from 2000, when we convened the National General Council. We became aware that the ANC member is no longer the same as the member who joined the ANC in the days of illegality, when the ANC was an illegal organization. Because those who joined it at that time are men and women who understood that there would be no reward other than the liberation of all South Africans. But there would be no personal rewards or decorations. And that the possibility existed that you could even be eliminated or imprisoned or hounded into exile or maimed and so on. And so they were a different caliber altogether. And we realized that the ANC in 2000 had been in government for about 6 years. And we realized that not only the new members were treating the ANC as a legitimate stepping stone into opportunities for self-enrichment. Not only the new members were guilty of that, but that even some of the old members had been overwhelmed and overcome by the temptations of power. Because I think it's Benjamin Franklin who said, nearly all men are capable of dealing with any adversity. But if you want to know the real character of somebody, give them power. Because power has an intoxicating effect. And so we realized in 2000 that we are the governing party, and the reports are flowing into our offices indicating that we aren't actually covering ourselves in glory in the manner in which we execute our responsibilities as government. And so we ask the question, what steps are required if we are to defend and protect the true character of the ANC as an agent for change and a servant of the people? We asked that question, we debated. At the end, we said, well, we must create a new cadre. Must create a new cadre. And how are we going to create a new cadre? We thought that could be done through political education. I must say that part of the difficulty that we have is that arises, in fact, from the alliance between the South African Communist Party and the African National Congress. Not because of what these parties represent, but historically because the party, the Communist Party, had a policy of training all its members. Now, there's a book written by Norbert Motlanthe. Its title is The Autobiography of an Unknown South African. In it, he explains how the Communist Party used to train its members. They would bring them into Johannesburg. That is, besides the night schools were used for literacy classes, but the content of those classes also explained that society is divided into classes. So Norbert Motlanthe explains in this book that the party would bring them into Johannesburg for a month, one full month. And every day of that month, they would be attending classes. And they were taught all subjects: philosophy, historical materialism, dialectical materialism, political economy, how to take minutes in a meeting, administration, bookkeeping, and so on. So when they emerged from this school, he, for instance, just to illustrate the point, he emerged from this party school. He came from Pretoria and went back to Pretoria to organize and establish trade unions, organized workers, established trade unions, ran their administration. Until, and of course, he had an attitude towards the pass system, so he never carried a pass, and the police arrested him until they got to know him so well that there was no point in arresting him, because they knew whenever they wanted to pick him up, they could always do so. And eventually, when he was banned because the government slapped him with house arrest, he drafted an affidavit because he had no pass. So without a pass, he couldn't apply for a passport, not even an exit passport. So he drafted an affidavit explaining who he is and so on, and went to the commissioner, persuaded the commissioner to authenticate the affidavit. And armed with this affidavit, he made arrangements. He wrote to people in England, and they said, well, they could host him. So arrangements were made for him to fly out. He went to the airport armed with this affidavit, written by himself in his own writing. So he's in the line to board, and when they say, well, at customs control, they want, and remember this is 63. And so they say passport, he produces his affidavit. And this officer pulls him aside, the rest of the people board, and at the end they phone. So the security police confirm that they know him, and they know him very well. So the security police says to the custom official, please explain to him that if he leaves without passport, no country will receive him, and South Africa will not accept him back. So he should know that he will be without a country. So the officer then explains to him, and Norbert Motlanthe accepts the explanation, and got onto the plane. His trip was long. He had to go to Vienna, from Vienna to Switzerland, from there off to London. And to his great surprise, the lady sent to collect him from the airport was none other than Mary Benson. Mary Benson was born in Pretoria. So Norbert Mokgatle knew Mary Benson's father, and so he was among friends and family in England. So he lived in England until his death. I'm explaining this because the ANC became a progressive organization at a particular time of its evolution and development. It was at the time when the dual membership of the Communist Party and the ANC was accepted. And it benefited immensely from its members who were also members of the Communist Party, because they brought into the ANC the training they received in the Communist Party and helped the ANC in terms of always correctly analyzing the situation in order to determine what the next step would be. Because in politics, the burden is always to read the situation accurately. It's a burden of leadership. If a leadership engages in horse racing and doodling and so on and doesn't analyze the situation, that leadership will get somewhere, but it may not be in the right direction. And so, when we analyze and try to understand the weaknesses in the ANC today, as we try to renew the ANC, we've got to understand what it is which made the ANC to be a progressive organization. What is it that made the ANC to become a non-racial organization? What is it that made the ANC to posit non-racialism against the notion of white supremacy at a time when it could have been very easy to simply posit black supremacy against white supremacy? But the ANC elected to say South Africa belongs to all who live in it, black and white. And of course, that stance, that understanding, caused such internal ruction that it gave birth to the Pan-Africanist Congress. And so today, we hear from time to time pronouncements from the ANC, even at leadership level, which harp on the note of racism. And yet the responsibility of the ANC is to lead South Africans towards this strategic goal of non-racial, non-sexist, prosperous and united democratic country. That is the responsibility of the ANC. But once you have, through pronouncements, through action, the ANC communicating a message which says it has the majority of numbers on its side, even in the National Assembly. The onus and responsibility of the ANC is to use the force of persuasion. It must mount more compelling arguments in the House than to rely on superior numbers. Because if it relies on superior numbers in the House, the message which it communicates to those who, for whatever reason, may believe that they don't have the numbers. The message that's communicated is that because they don't have the numbers, they will be dealt with in short shrift by the ANC. And so we have to understand that in the absence of training members, the ANC will lose its character. The ANC will lose its prestige and authority to lead, and the ANC will become ordinary. If it is ordinary, then South Africans will, of course, choose to associate with other parties other than itself. So the renewal has to be informed by a rigorous analysis of what it is that made the ANC to be a progressive organization. It's the same as that which is conducted by the ANC. And it's training on topical issues. On topical issues. At the time of CODESA, it would be around negotiations and negotiation strategies and so on. At the time of globalization, it would be on globalization, whatever it means. At the time of nationalization of the mines, it will be about nationalization. So it's topical training on topical issues. Whereas the training that made the ANC members to be progressive was not on topical issues. It was methodical. It left them with the ability to analyze and read the situation accurately. And that it is that type of training that is required. So and of course, part of the disadvantage arising from this relationship is the language, the vocabulary. The vocabulary used, I mean, now we're preparing for a policy conference. If you pick up ANC policy discussion documents now and read them, the language, the vocabulary, in certain instances, does not convey what the ANC wants to convey. In certain instances. Because it is language which is inherited. Good example is second transition. The second transition. second transition. From what or from where to where? What constituted the first transition? What were the tasks of that phase? Have all of those tasks been accomplished or not? But the language used is of that nature. It's a smattering of Marxist jargon. But of course, trained minds know that concepts must convey what they are meant to convey. So we can't be reckless with words, because unfortunately words are not like a finger. There's an idiom in Setswana that says, literally, the translation is that once you've uttered the word, you can't pull it back. Only your finger can be pulled back. That's what it means. And so part of the responsibility of leadership is to ensure that the statements that we issue convey what we want to convey, and not just words. And that is why the stalwarts of the Communist Party and the ANC men like Harold Wolpe, Joe Slovo, Bram Fisher, Ben Turok, Moses Kotane, Walter Sisulu, always took the trouble to ensure that the words that they put together convey the message which they want to convey. And I'm saying this because today it's very easy to throw in all these words and get away with it. In fact, I got worried a few years back already. When I was still Secretary General of the ANC, we used to have these debates with the President Thabo Mbeki, because our January 8th messages were also reflective of the years of illegality, when the ANC was a banned organization in South Africa and could not communicate directly with South Africans. It relied on issuing the statement of the National Executive Committee on the occasion of its birthday on the 8th of January. And that statement was always anticipated by activists inside South Africa, because it constituted a program of action for the year. It gave the reading of the global situation, the internal situation, and what the theme and the tasks for that year would be. So in a way, the statement was a set of orders for activists. But now you see we are not just a free people, we are also a governing party. So we are a governing party, and as such, the state of the nation delivered in Parliament is the state of the nation. But we still carry on to give the January 8th statement. And my discovery was, to my shock, was that, in fact, the statement is now read on that day only. Once people are done with it on the day, it does not inform their other programs as they developed programs. It's not informed by the January 8th statement of the National Executive Committee. So, my own view is that the ANC has to renew itself. And the process of such renewal must be preceded by rigorous analysis of the ANC as it exists today. As well as an assessment and evaluation of how successful we have been in implementing the decisions and resolutions adopted, so that the strong points and the weak points can be laid bare, and the prescribed remedies should be informed by that kind of self-criticism and analysis. But of course, it calls for the ANC to be able to stand back, to pull back and take a hard look at itself, free itself or rid itself of sentimentalism, so that we don't become sentimental. Because if we do not do that, if we do not renew the ANC, the reality is that there will be a realignment of forces, because nature doesn't allow for inertia. Nature exists in motion all the time. So the notion that as it was, so shall it be, is a great barrier to progress. It's a great barrier to progress. And it's very easy when you have a glorious past. It's very easy when you have a glorious past to say, these are the standards. These are the standards, we will live by these standards only. And so there must be, you become suspicious of new ideas. You become worried when what you are familiar with, the rationale underpinning your institutions, is being questioned. You become worried by that. Because when you celebrate the past and also allow that glorious past to be the beginning and the end, then of course you are conservative because you are conserving the truths of yesterday. That which was true yesterday may not be true today. And that's the danger that the ANC needs to guard against. It needs to guard against conservatism, being conservative to conserve the truths of yesterday. So I'm saying all of this because our country, South Africa, in fact, the South African nation is really no different from the American nation. In fact, the parallels are quite striking. Because here in South Africa, we have always had influx of people into South Africa throughout. And that was eloquently displayed during the hosting of the FIFA World Cup, because nearly all the 31 teams that came here had support bases in South Africa from among South Africans, because that's who we are. That's who we are. The history tells us that when Jan van Riebeeck arrived here, and we were made, at primary school to memorize even the names of the rafts and the yachts that he used, dromedaries, and so on. When he arrived here, he brought with him soldiers. But his mandate was to establish a refreshment station. And so the first question which arose was, on whose land is he going to establish such a refreshment station? So the land question arose almost immediately as one of the difficulties that South Africa would have to deal with. The second question was, okay, they have a piece of land now, but who is going to till it? Because soldiers normally are not trained to till the land and produce fresh vegetables and so on. And so the next question which arose almost immediately was labor. Where would the labor come from to produce supplies for the passing vessels? And so slaves had to be brought in. Slaves from Malaysia, India, Java. And later on, when the British annexed the Cape Colony, they became very generous to the French Huguenots who were being persecuted in France. So they asked for refuge in England, and the British said, well, you're most welcome, please come. We have a place down south, so they brought them here. And thanks to that, we are today the greatest producers of wine in the continent. It's thanks to the French Huguenots. And many other people came. Indentured laborers, in the sugarcane plantations, in the mines, Chinese laborers, artisans into the mines, fortune hunters, many, many people from all over the world. And this is who we are. That is why today, if you know the history of South Africa, today when the people speak of xenophobia and Afrophobia, it's an oddity because our very nature, the tapestry of South African nation, is made up of people from all over the world. And that is why, the circle is completed when Professor Tobias helps us understand our origins at the cradle of humanity. That in fact, it may very well be that every human being originates from here. And so those who came, welcome, they were coming home. But of course, if we are not cultured enough to understand our own history and who we are, these fault lines of racism, of fear of strangers will rear their ugly heads from time to time. Now, I also want to deal with the current political and socio-economic situation in South Africa. I think we have made strides in terms of consolidating our democracy. Every day we learn lessons which only serves to strengthen our commitment as a democracy. We have a transformative constitution which recognizes our recent history of discrimination, oppression, and deprivation. And it says we must address those. It directs us to address these accumulated disabilities. At the same time, we live in a country that is made up of two parts. The one part is developed. The social infrastructure is that which can be found in any capital in the world. The other part is underdeveloped. And so apartheid exists today in the form of backlogs in social infrastructure. When you are up in the air and fly low flying, like in a helicopter, once you see green, lush areas with trees, you know that this is a white suburb. White folk live here. When you see rugged, dry area, you know that black folk live there. And it is that which we have to eliminate. If we can eradicate that, apartheid would be gone. Recent example of what I'm saying is when in 2010, the Blue Bulls qualified for the semifinals of Super 14. At a time when their home ground, Loftus, was now taken by FIFA. The local organizing committee had taken over that stadium. And they needed to find an alternative stadium within driving distance so that their supporters could be there without having to fly and so on. So they searched around for an alternative stadium, and they found it in Soweto. Orlando Stadium had been renovated. It was fine. It met their requirements. And so on that day, supporters of the Blue Bulls, some of them adults, who have never set foot in a township in their lives, but who could not resist going to support the Blue Bulls on that day. So off they drove in tandem to Orlando Stadium. And of course, the people of Soweto, because Johannesburg is cosmopolitan. These are people who lived in townships that were integrated before. Prosperous Township, George Gog, Sophia Town, they were forcefully removed from there in order to, as part of the apartheid social engineering. So they are very enterprising. When they understood that the Blue Bulls would be coming, most of them in Orlando East, they painted their fences, and some even the houses themselves, the four-roomed houses there, in blue and white, and created braai stands all over the yards there. So the supporters of the Blue Bulls felt most welcome. And of course, they made a discovery as well that, you know, the taverns in Pretoria, the price that they charge for a pint of beer in Soweto, the same price fetches you 750 milliliters of beer. So there was a bonus. They played very well. The supporters were happy. They won and qualified for the finals, and they took the finals back to Orlando Stadium. What this tells us is that if we can create the same social infrastructure everywhere, people will settle everywhere. They'll become neighbors, they'll play together, and it would be wonderful. Kali Krill of the Solidarity, the trade union Solidarity, which has given itself the mission of protecting the interests of white workers who believe that there is reverse discrimination against white workers. Their children don't play rugby, they play soccer. And so they find that over weekends, they must drive their children to go and play in the townships over weekends. And I'm saying to myself, if only, if the schools are there, and the schools have all the sports facilities, and they will very easily settle. So this apartheid engineering, social engineering, would be reversed. Not by legislation, not because people are compelled to do so, but because people feel that this is a wonderful country, they are free to live everywhere. So that is the challenge which faces us today, how to eliminate apartheid as it exists now in the form of backlog in social infrastructure. But of course, South Africa is not an island. Today's economy is globalized. And so our markets, the people who buy from us raw material and value-add commodities, and the people from whom we also buy certain things, that this economy, the global economy, is going through a severe crisis. Severe crisis. In Europe today, the only country whose economy is growing is Germany. Only German economy is growing. And the explanation is that from the time when Germany emerged out of the Second World War, having been defeated, settled with the responsibility to reconstruct the country, to pay war reparations, they entered into a system of co-determination, whereby government, organized labor, business work together. And they've maintained that system up to this day. Up to this day. If you want to get a correct analysis of the economic prospects of any sector in Germany, you must go and ask the unions. Their analysts are better than the ones that do analysis for Bloomberg. And that's how they determine their wage demands. They don't just say, we want X% and so on. They do an analysis of their sector first and foremost. If it's a metal, IG Metal, the metal union, they will do their own analysis and projections for their own sector. Once they've done that, they then factor that into an analysis of the whole German economy and determine where to pitch their wage demands. And by agreement, the German worker has been taking less wages. A few years ago, they realized that they don't want to accumulate huge deficits. And so they systematically prepared to ensure that they don't end up in debt. Now that the Eurozone is in trouble, in order to stimulate the economy, to ensure that even the flat growth that they are achieving is maintained, they've decided deliberately that rather than taking the money and going abroad to invest it in other countries, they've decided that they are now going to give handsome increases to the working people so that the working people can then stimulate growth, economic growth, by increasing demand. Because remember, under this system, consumption is a function of liquidity. If you don't have money to buy a loaf of bread or the flour to bake it, you can't eat it. So today, when Greece and the peaks, Portugal, Italy, Greece, and Spain, are trying to find ways of stimulating economic recovery, and the prescription is austerity measures. So you go to people who already cannot afford to buy basics, and you say, tighten up your belts. So education will no longer be free, and so on and so forth. Now, I suppose earlier in the sessions, Ben Fine must have dealt with these questions of how to stimulate the economy, we have to ask the question. We have to pose the difficult question, because only a few decades ago, China had 250 million people living under the poverty datum line. And the Chinese Communist Party did an analysis which made them understand that with all the enterprises owned and controlled by the state. Now, this is very instructive because, you see, there's talk and debate of nationalization here. Now, the Chinese owned everything. The state owned barber shops, everything. All enterprises. And yet, the amount of capital that they could generate and mobilize was far, far, far less than what was required to kickstart economic development. Far. And so they had to ask themselves a hard question, difficult question. Because you can't distribute poverty. The whole notion, the whole idea of doing away with class exploitation presupposes flourishing economy, that the society would be able to produce plenty, so much that there will be enough and surplus for everybody. That's what it presupposes. But when people are rationed with basics, when foodstuffs are rationed, you can't eliminate class stratification. It's not possible to do that. And so the Chinese Communist Party did an analysis, and their conclusions were very interesting, very instructive, because they said they had committed a fundamental mistake by believing that they could jump out of capitalism into socialism. That's what the Chinese Communist Party said. And they said instead, there is an intervening stage which they jumped, which they designate as the primary stage. And they identify the tasks of this primary stage. 3 tasks, only 3. 1, that they should raise the overall education levels of the entire nation. 2, they should modernize their forces of production. That means innovation, equipment, technology, and the skills to go with that. 3, they should close the gap between urban and rural. Now, you see, Chinese, because they are 1.3 million in number, they can't afford, you see, to take decisions and not work out how those decisions are going to be implemented. So they had to ask the question, what are the timelines for achieving these 3 tasks? And they gave themselves an answer which I found quite instructive, really. They say it would take them 100 years to accomplish these 3 tasks. 100 years. Once they'd decided on that, They then ask another question. How will they access capital in order to stimulate economic growth? Remember, they own everything. The state owns everything inside China. So they concluded that the capital they need does not resort inside China, it resorts outside of China in private hands. And so they developed the open door policy, how to attract this capital from outside into China. Of course, at that time, they were also resolving the question of Hong Kong. And so the initial capital also came from Hong Kong. Because they are a huge market. They are a huge market. Any producer, if you produce any article that you can sell to the Chinese for $1 a piece, and you get 500 million Chinese to buy it, you are printing money. And so the investors started flooding China with requests. Manufacturers, they said, no, come, we have the labor, here is the land, put up your factory, you are free to repatriate your profits. South African breweries, SAB Miller, has got 15 plants in China now, as we speak, 15 of them. They went in there to access that huge market. But the Chinese say it's on a 30-year lease basis. These plants are yours, make your money, but it's 30 years. Once 30 years lapses, these become state-owned enterprises. That's what the Chinese say. Because they say their goal is to build socialism with Chinese characteristics. Now, within a short space of time, they reduced the 250 million to 10 million and accumulated. The Chinese say they are not interested in developing the atomic bombs and so on. They are interested in building up reserves of hard currency. And so that has enabled them. They go into Angola, next door here, and they say to the Angolans, how can we be of help to you? We are interested in oil and other minerals. And the Angolans say, well, we have 3 railway lines that are in disrepair here, damaged during the Civil War. We want them rehabilitated. Chinese agree. They have all the finances. They bring $2 billion US with them. At that time, our people at Spoornet were still negotiating with the Angolans. Still negotiating for a contract to rehabilitate the railway lines. And of course, they were still going to have to come back and find the finances. So the Chinese go there with the finances up front. So they got the contract. And they say they will provide 70% of the workforce. The Angolans must put up the remaining 30. The Angolans agree, they sign off, wonderful. But they use the platoon system. In other words, it's shift, so they work 24 hours. The Angolans workers are not used to that kind of work arrangements. So they desert After a month, they desert. And the Chinese don't complain. They just replace them with other workers from China. That's how aggressive they are today. Now, I'm narrating all of this because it seem like it leaves us with the question as to whether these measures that are being applied to try and revive and re-stimulate the economies in Europe, here in Africa and elsewhere, whether these measures are appropriate or not. But we are challenged to explore alternatives. And I think the Harold Wolpe, were he in our midst, would have been grappling with these questions. Would have been grappling with these questions. And that is why I thought it is important to pose this question as well. And I want to leave you with having posed the question, because I have no answer myself. I want to leave you with Terry Eagleton's quotation, where he says, if you do not resist the apparently inevitable, you will never know how inevitable the inevitable was. And I thank you for your attention. Thank you.